Two ships disappeared from international waters this morning. One was linked to Israel, one was linked to an American exporter. Both were seized by Iran, and the US can't fire back because it may have already run out of the missiles to do it. Hello and welcome. I am Rick Orban, and you have started watching The Truth Global. Two cargo ships have just vanished from international waters in the Strait of Hormuz. Their names? MSC Francesca, tied to an Israeli shipping company, and Epaminondas, both seized within hours of each other by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy. A third vessel was fired upon and fled. This is not a skirmish. This is a calculated countermove in a war that has quietly shifted from the skies to the sea. What you are watching unfold right now in the Gulf of Oman is not random escalation. Iran is responding with cold, strategic precision to America's own seizure of 3 Iranian oil tankers, 2 in Asian waters, 1 near the strait itself. Neither side has fired missiles at the other. Not yet. But the lines are being drawn in shipping lanes that carry nearly 20% of the world's traded oil. The ceasefire Donald Trump announced and then unilaterally extended looks less like a peace process and more like a pause that neither side knows how to exit. Meanwhile, the economic consequences are already reaching your grocery store, your airline ticket, and possibly your next paycheck. Stay with us, because this story is far more dangerous than the headlines suggest. If this is your first time here, subscribe. We are tracking this in real time. To understand what is happening at sea, you need to understand the logic of each player. America's strategy under Donald Trump is one of economic strangulation. By intercepting Iranian oil tankers, 3 were seized in a single week across separate ocean theaters, from the Indo-Pacific to the Gulf. Washington is trying to choke Iran's primary revenue stream. Iran exports approximately 2 million barrels of oil daily. At current prices, that represents roughly $200 million every 24 hours. Disrupting even a fraction of that flow is meant to generate enough internal pressure that Tehran's leadership capitulates at the negotiating table. But Iran has read this playbook before, and its response this time is not panic, it is symmetry. By seizing ships linked to Israel and American exporters, Tehran is telling Washington, if you treat commercial interdiction as legitimate warfare, we will respond in kind. The IRGC Navy cited navigational violations and tampering with tracking systems as the legal justification. The real message, however, is written in the shipping lanes themselves. This is where things connect. The United Kingdom's Maritime Trade Operations, UKMTO, the body that monitors vessel safety across the region, confirmed all 3 incidents with precise timestamps. 2 were flagged at 6:38 UTC, 1 at 3:55 UTC. The geographical coordinates placed 2 ships just 8 nautical miles off Iran's coast, and the third 15 nautical miles northeast of Oman. This is not chaos. This is choreography. Donald Trump has extended his ceasefire with Iran. He announced it as a victory. But the ceasefire was never a mutual agreement. It was a unilateral American declaration, and Iran has not endorsed it, honored it, or even formally acknowledged it as binding. Iran's foreign ministry spokesman, Esmail Baghaei, speaking directly to BBC World Service, was explicit. There is no decision to participate in the Islamabad peace negotiations. Baghai's language was pointed. He said that Iran never committed to attending talks it had not agreed to attend. He accused Washington of negotiating in bad faith and of changing its positions so frequently that, as he put it, America itself does not know what it is doing. This is not diplomatic posturing. It is a structured refusal rooted in a calculation that Iran's position is stronger than it appears. At the same time, something remarkable happened in Western media. The Telegraph, a conservative, traditionally pro-Trump British newspaper, published an inside account of the White House's Iran policy that used the phrase clusterfuck to describe the internal state of the peace process. Quoting a White House insider, the report described a president increasingly reliant on loyalists who painted a rosier picture of the conflict than reality warrants. The paper said Trump was making decisions based on a filtered, optimistic intelligence portrait that had almost no connection to what was happening on the ground. When a newspaper that has consistently supported Trump breaks that story, it matters. While diplomats circle and naval vessels jockey for position in the Gulf, the consequences are already arriving in a form most people understand: prices. The Kiel Institute for the World Economy, one of Europe's most respected economic research bodies, released a report specifically modeling the impact of a Strait of Hormuz closure on global supply chains. Its findings are stark. The disruption is not a future risk, it is a present one, and its effects, the report warns, will be felt most severely in South Asia. The Strait of Hormuz is not merely an oil corridor. A third of the world's fertilizer shipments also pass through it. European Central Bank President Christine Lagarde, speaking in her capacity as a senior European financial authority, warned publicly that food rationing is a real possibility due to fertilizer supply disruptions. Her framing was unambiguous. This is a matter of when, not if. European institutions are not prepared. Elsewhere, the signal is already visible in airline operations. Lufthansa has canceled approximately 20,000 short-haul flights this summer, citing the rising cost of jet fuel as a core factor in medium-term route planning. Air Canada has suspended 6 routes, including services connecting to New York's John F. Kennedy International Airport and Salt Lake City, describing them as no longer economically feasible amid the fuel cost crisis. Jet fuel prices have roughly doubled since hostilities began. The war in the Gulf is now a kitchen table issue in North America and Europe. Donald Trump's difficulty is not purely geopolitical. It is domestic. His Iran strategy was premised on a rapid Iranian capitulation, a pressure campaign so severe that Tehran would arrive at the negotiating table on American terms. That calculation has not materialized, and the gap between Trump's public declarations and observable reality is widening at a pace that even his traditional allies in the financial press can no longer ignore. Goldman Sachs CEO David Solomon, speaking to Bloomberg, said that a US recession is now only one tweet away. That framing is deliberate. Solomon was not describing a distant economic risk. He was describing an environment so fragile that a single misread statement by the president could cascade into a contraction. Meanwhile, Trump himself acknowledged in a social media post that he expected oil to reach $200 per barrel. Days earlier, he had said it would not reach 100. The reversal went largely unchallenged by the financial media, which commentator Cenk Uygur argued was itself a symptom of the problem. Uyghur's framing was blunt. Wall Street investors continue to price the conflict as if an American victory is imminent and oil markets will normalize shortly. He argued that this disconnect between financial market sentiment and physical market reality represents a deferred shock, one that will arrive with devastating force when the assumption of quick resolution finally breaks. The paper price of oil has not spiked. The real price on the ground already has. Tehran's refusal to attend the Islamabad talks is not an accident of scheduling. It is a deliberate, strategic choice rooted in a clear-eyed assessment of its own leverage. Iran's leadership has determined, correctly based on the evidence, that every week the conflict continues without a diplomatic breakthrough strengthens their negotiating position. They are not fighting to win militarily. They are fighting to avoid losing diplomatically. This is where Iran's internal debate becomes critical. Reports from Al Jazeera indicate that Iran's leadership is actively divided between factions advocating for war continuation and those pressing for a negotiated settlement. What unites both camps is the conviction that any negotiation must begin from a position of strength, and that the battlefield gains achieved since hostilities began cannot be surrendered at the table. This means Iran will only negotiate on terms it believes it can enforce. The naval seizures must be understood within this framework. Iran is not trying to close the Strait of Hormuz. That would be an act of economic self-destruction, since Iran itself relies on the waterway for its own exports. What Iran is doing is maintaining controlled pressure, enough to signal resolve, enough to impose costs on Washington, but calibrated carefully to avoid the threshold that would trigger a full American military escalation. This is brinkmanship, practiced by a state that has spent decades learning exactly where that threshold lies. There is a constraint operating on the American side that has received almost no attention in mainstream coverage, but which may be the most consequential factor shaping what happens next. CNN reported, citing defense officials, that the United States military has significantly depleted its precision missile stockpile through its operations against Iran. The stockpile degradation is severe enough that American constitutional experts and military planners are now openly discussing whether the U.S. could sustain another conflict at the same intensity if the ceasefire collapses. This is not a minor logistical footnote. It is a strategic vulnerability. A superpower that cannot replenish its precision munitions inventory fast enough to cover a new conflict is a superpower operating under a ceiling, regardless of what its president says publicly. This explains, at least in part, why the ceasefire extension happened, not because Iran was pressured into peace, but because the American military needed time. Simultaneously, a separate constitutional clock is ticking. Legal scholars and members of Congress are raising War Powers Act questions. Under the Act, a president must obtain congressional authorization for sustained military operations within 60 days. Constitutional experts, cited in reporting on the Capitol Hill debate, argue that by May 1st, Trump must either secure congressional approval or withdraw forces. The Republican majority in both chambers makes full defection unlikely. But if even a handful of Republicans join Democratic opposition, the political arithmetic becomes uncomfortable for the White House. Here's what the weight of evidence suggests. Neither side is winning, and both sides know it. The United States has the economic and military firepower to sustain pressure, but not indefinitely and not without consequences that are now being felt by ordinary people on multiple continents. Iran has the strategic patience, the geographic advantage, and the institutional memory to outlast an American administration whose own internal coherence is being questioned by its traditional allies. The most dangerous scenario is not a decisive military clash. It is a prolonged, low-intensity naval war that slowly hollows out global supply chains while both sides wait for the other to break first. The Kiel Institute's food security warning, Christine Lagarde's fertilizer alarm, the airline cancellations, the recession risk flagged by Goldman Sachs. These are not isolated data points. They are the early tremors of a supply shock that could define the global economy for years. What happens next will depend on three variables. Whether Iran concludes that negotiations are in its interest before sanctions pressure becomes unsustainable. Whether Trump's domestic political standing deteriorates to the point where his advisors force a genuine pivot. And whether the military's missile stockpile situation creates an internal deadline that the public never sees. The Strait of Hormuz is not just a waterway. It is the pressure valve of the world economy. Right now, that valve is being fought over, and nobody has a plan for what happens when it breaks. If you want to stay ahead of this story, subscribe, hit the bell, and share this video. We will be back as soon as the next development breaks.